everybody. So this is going to be the bonus video for the week, and it's not the bonus video you're expecting, and I'm going to explain why, and then we're going to get into what this video is. This video may make its way onto YouTube because of the topic, because I think it's a good topic to get into. And so if you are seeing it on YouTube and you would like to see more, you can, of course, join up on Patreon, where every week, even on the $5 tier, we pull some cards, talk about some energies and all that good stuff. So for this week, initially I thought I was going to be doing a run through of the new tarot deck that my sister bought me for the solstice, and I had not yet got my hands on it because she had sent it to the address in the UK and I was not back yet, and I thought I was going to be back today. So you were all thinking, oh yes, she'll be back, and you know, unless you follow me on Facebook and you know that I had an anxiety freak out because on Friday we had storms in Norway so bad that all the flights were cancelled, all the bridges were shut. We're actually on a little island, because if you didn't know, which I didn't, along the northern coastline of Norway is actually made up of lots of little islands as well. I didn't know this, so share the info. Wink. Not that it's going to be helpful really, but it's interesting. So they shut all the bridges down, the waves are really high, it was terrifying. The power went out, the waves were really high, the wind was howling, things were being battered, it was a whole mess. I wasn't traveling that day. Not even given a choice, because they're all cancelled. Big red line through all of them. It was interesting. I took a screenshot. I'm not obviously sharing screenshots, but I took a screenshot. And then today, when I rearranged the flight, yesterday came on the news, big hurricane storms forecasted in the UK, massive winds. And when I was supposed to be arriving today, it was supposed to be 47 miles per hour on the runway. And I was just like, I don't think I can, I have anxiety, and if I had gone, I would have been a mess. And the Viking was very against it. He was very stressed by the idea of me putting myself at risk. So I'm here longer than anticipated. Probably the end of the week is when I'm going back again. So that's an update for people as who are expecting books and things as well. I must go post on the Starry Eyed Facebook page about that. Right, there you go, brain in action. So for the rest of this video, this chitty chat here on Patreon originally, which we may well, to be honest, I might just edit it and put it on. They don't need to know the personal stuff, that's between us guys. So if it does go up on YouTube later, as some of them do, because the videos are meant to be early access here on Patreon, some of them just stay between me and you. Wink. But I think if there's a good discussion to be had, then we should put it up on YouTube as well, as long as YouTube is viable, which it may not be for much longer, who knows. So if you don't know about that and you're confused, YouTube are doing strange things with copper, with things that are aimed at kids, or it's just a mess. And they're threatening finding people and all sorts. A lot of people are very worried about it. Anyway, this video is not about that. This video eventually is going to be all about big goddess energy. So we pulled for Patreon from the Goddess Knowledge cards two goddesses who I think really embody the big goddess energy, which was Athena and Rhiannon. And so I decided for this portion of the tea with Joey, it should be coffee with Joey, and Joey forgot her coffee. It's a mess after this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. More about that in the podcast. But big goddess energy to me, what does that mean? How has that impacted me? How has that changed over time? And I think I will start with something that I mentioned in the podcast this week for Patreon, which was the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, which I said is one of the, the OG original goddess. That's not what it means. I know. But, we're in big goddess energy. Just before someone corrects me. I know, I'm being silly. Women Who Run With the Wolves, one of the original empowering books, one of the probably most well-known and beautiful for stitchomancy, is one of the most empowering books I know. And it kind of talks about embracing your inner wild woman. And it's all very much an empowerment stories of women and folk tales and things of that nature. And there was a time in my life where I couldn't read it. I couldn't bring myself to read the words. And the reason is because that I felt I was like betraying my inner goddess, my inner wild woman at that time. I didn't feel that I was reaching for things. I didn't feel like I was pushing through the shell. Now, I look back with hindsight, and I think it was a time of very much being shelled and walled in, but it was very much about like healing. It was like a liminal point between all the traumas of the past and reevaluation of self and getting myself back on my feet and many, many other things. And it was just very overwhelming. But at the time, I couldn't read the book. I didn't feel that I was honoring that process. Like it was almost like it was being inauthentic to even read the words, which is a really strange reaction to something, because you think that when you're reading it, you're imbibing it, you're taking in an advice capacity, right? And even within the book, it's like you still have time if you haven't been called an incorrigible woman yet. And I was just like, because some of it really resonated, but then the bits that felt like solutions, I wasn't there yet. I wasn't ready to implement any of that yet. So for a long time, I didn't read it. And I felt like that wild woman, that wildness, that wilderness, that empowerment is a big part of big goddess energy. It's not the entirety of it. It is just part of it. And I think when we talk about big goddess energy, we obviously have to say that it's massively personal, as is all deity-based interactions, because we are filtering it out through our own personal lens at any given point. We're talking about us and our relationship with deity. It's as much as there is an unfortunate culture of this is the way and this is the only way that creeps in even within pagan paths. I think a lot of us know that there's so much personal gnosis around spirituality that trying to say one message is the way is very counterintuitive, because goddess energy, which we're talking about, is multifaceted, right? Like we as people, and I've used many analyses over the years to try and describe how I see divinity, and I used the ocean one, and I've also used the dragon's egg crystal one. There are two that come to mind. So the idea of divinity in terms of the ocean is the ocean is this massive body of energy, of power, of life and death. It's terrifying. Ocean is terrifying when you really sit and think about it. That's the Virgo brain, like, oh my god, or anxiety, who knows. The ocean is this massive body, this massive element on our planet, which is unexplored. It's the last big unexplored space on our planet. And we don't know what's down there. And we can't get down there currently. Not completely. And spirituality to me is like if you're on a boat on the ocean and there's light coming down, rays of sunshine coming down onto the light, and we see the way the light dapples over the waves, and the light then protrudes in a certain depth, but that light skews because of the way that it interacts with water. And so that skewing and the way that we perceive it is because of us. It's our limitations. The way that we perceive the world, the way that we see things, is limited by our vision, our mind, our brain. And we know that even though we can only see so far, there's a whole lot of ocean down there, even further than we can see. And we can deep dive. We can go for a deep dive in the spiritual waters, but we can only go as far as we can go. And we can keep exploring, but let's face it, one person in their entire lifetime is not going to explore the whole ocean. And that is kind of a parallel for throwing the microphone on your lap. Hello, microphone. Are you okay? I think we're fine. The light hasn't gone up, so hopefully this carries on recording. Otherwise, this will be at the end of the video. But that is one symmetry in nature that I think of. And the dragon's egg crystal is another. So the dragon egg crystals are generally like frosted all the way around, and then you can see into the top. And then, you know, as you see it, you see all the inclusions and the light changes and everything moves, and you're kind of investigating. And that was another analysis. I prefer the ocean one. I think that gives a better all-round encompass. But the dragon's crystal one works too. So big goddess energy changes depending on who you're talking to, what it means to us. So in the beginning, I'm somewhere between biblical and a wizard then. That was weird. Bilbo Baggins. Anyway. We keep getting Lord of the Rings references. Can you tell I like it? 20 years anniversary, my God, of the movies, obviously. Anyway, back on track. I've totally lost my trail of thought. In the beginning, when I was approaching spirituality, I had some very strong feelings as a child. I was never actually pushed into a particularly dogmatic worldview of religion through other people. I know a lot of people have experienced that, and they've kind of had to overcome the conditioning of previous religions. I didn't really have a lot of that. I was very aware of Christianity, and there were like run-ins with Christianity, but I grew up really kind of free from that, and seeing it from the outside in, I just knew it was not for me. My mother claimed to be Christian, but it was, I mean, nothing to write home about. I mean, claiming is one thing, but she was a very God is male, and it fed into her whole thing, and I think I completely rebelled against that because that felt utterly toxic to me. So I went all the other way, and I was like, in nature there's a balance of masculine and feminine. I was much more interested in the elements very early on, and animals and everything having a spirit. Very animalistic child, and I wanted to save the rainforests and didn't know how, and it stressed me out, age 7 or younger, and I wanted to sign up to help the animals at the RSPCA and volunteer, and they wouldn't let me because I wasn't old enough. I really wanted to do it right up until I was like, I think it was 15 or 16. I was trying to do it and they wouldn't let me. You had to be like 17, 18 to do it at the time, something like that. By which point I had planned to go to university, so I couldn't do that. So anyway, so I was all about that kind of, it was almost like that kind of mysticism, that nature, that belief in magic, belief in something other. It was a really interesting exercise. We did have RE lessons when I was at school. I escaped having to do it for a GCSE. I think I was one of the last years that didn't have to do it for a qualification. But we had the lessons, and at one point they were like, write an alternative viewpoint on a creation story for the world, like just make one up, right? And mine was this woman alone in the darkness, and she was alone and she was scared and she started to cry, and her tears became the first element, which was water, and then the progression of the story was her birthing the elements into beings. It's very goddess based for somebody who at the time had no idea about goddess worship. the four elements, witchcraft, or or Wicca, which was my introduction, because I was solitary and that's what was available. No hate against Wicca. As an introduction for me, wasn't where I landed in the end, but I think it was a beautiful gateway. And so for me, obviously, that was big goddess energy before I'd even learnt there was such a thing. That I already had that feeling in my soul of a very divine feminine. And I think I made it female on purpose because I was so damn sick of all like the male-centered divinity stories. And even in mythology, because of those societies, a lot of the religious mythology, even the stuff that was super interesting, was very centered around the masculine. Like the Greeks and Romans obviously were a massive part of the education system, and we all knew their myths. And I love mythology. I've always loved mythology as a kid. That was something else. And I had Enid Blyton's book of Greek gods and myths, and I loved it, devoured it. So I've always been a massive fan of gods, goddesses, myths, and all that sort of good juice, as well as history, of course. So big goddess energy has really been around me for a very long time. And I kind of rebelled against that kind of male-dominated introduction to religion at first. I did get to a point later where I was like, I need to redress this because we need to make sure we don't tip completely out of balance, just because we have been so used to it's only this. It doesn't mean that we have to go all the way over to it's only female, because that doesn't sit right with me either, because we are all things. We are all balanced. We are all merged. We are all masculine and feminine within ourselves and without, and so on. Everything in nature is masculine and feminine both, and none. Divinity is that on a massive scale. And honestly, I feel like we perceive deity as we are able to perceive it, and therefore we put it in camps, right? We say, well, they look like us, they talk like us, walk with the animals. I don't know where that came from. Talk with the animals, that's the gods. Walking with the humans, talking like the humans. This is weird. This is weird chat. Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Big goddess energy for me then became a balance. It became a reflection of who I wanted to become. And obviously, the more that I grew, the more that I reached out, the more that I wanted to be connected with divinity, the more I came into contact with big goddess energy. And obviously the Morrigan is step forward, and I'm biased, but I'm like, is there a bigger goddess energy than she? And I'm like, don't start those fights, because you don't need to be starting goddess fights. We're all massive, we're all powerful. Yeah, I know, because honestly I connect with deity and divinity all over through the channeling process, and channeling poetry, and well, we're going to have a whole talk on that soon. I promised someone a whole video on that, and I haven't forgotten. But there's a whole video about that coming. But channeling them, hearing them, feeling their energies, understanding their myths, having little fingers on the touchstone of divinity, really connects you to that big goddess energy. And what that means. And I think that walking with big goddess energy has been really interesting for me. There have been many points of connection that have evolved for me. I'm aware of the places that I still feel that I let down goddess energy. When we talked earlier about not being able to read Women Who Run with the Wolves, I think that still carries through, that there's still times where I'm aware of how human I am and the mistakes that I make, and you don't feel worthy of big goddess energy. And actually John Beckett released a post on Pathos yesterday, and I shared it, like, too sweet, guys, because he was talking about like the Morrigan doesn't want perfection, she wants persistence. or resilience. I think he said persistence, because perfection, persistence, right? And I was like, yes, exactly. And I think the more that we realign with that message, the happier we'll be, because it's not about how much we screw it up. Because I mean, he put it like she knew what she was signing up for when she called on you, and I'm like, yeah, because like human mind is like, oh my god, 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 and then you're like, the Morrigan is a goddess of prophecy. Like, she sees fate and time and outside of human conventions and all the rest of it, right? She knows what's coming. She knows what she signed up for with you. She knows you probably better than you know yourself, which is frightening. Because we are on this path of discovery of self, of empowerment of self, of learning to grow and blossom and enrich and empower and reach out and do that for both. As we do that for ourselves, so we do that for the world, because as we heal ourselves, so we heal the world. As within, so without, as above, so below. By the many wings of crow. That's the Morrigan one by me. That's the one I use. I added it for the big OG of crows, Morrigan. I swear, she was like, "I'll take you, but God, Joey." I feel like that's the thing. I feel like she gives me like the humans, like many times. Regardless, but I really liked that blog post that was about that we worry about not being enough when perhaps we already were, when we were all along. And as long as we do the work, because that's not an excuse at the same time, that's not an excuse to stop showing up. But then I feel like if we were going to do that, maybe she wouldn't have called on us, because she doesn't know. It's a whole mind warp, isn't it, really? But I think that accountability is really important, and holding ourselves to a good standard is really important, and keeping that big goddess energy within ourselves is the beginning point of understanding what it means to us and how we embody it as we go forward. Because as we learn to embody what we believe it to be, we learn more about it. We learn more about ourselves. We learn more about our connection to big goddess energy and what that means. And it's always really interesting, the rabbit holes of thought and conundrums that you go down, because, for example, one of them has been the idea of not caring what people think, right? And that for many is big goddess energy, just not giving a shiz. But I'm always really cautious with that, because I think, firstly, it gets brought up in a kind of arrogance usually. Like the first place that gets brought up is, I don't give an F about you. I don't give an F about you. I don't give an F. And it gets very aggressive, in a very arrogant, negative way. And it's not ever true when it's coming from that place either. I don't think that it's ever true, because that's like a self-defense mechanism thing that happens. That's our shadow. That's a shadow mask. That's being confrontational to prove that you don't care about what other people think. And I feel like if you're having to prove to other people that you don't care, then you care, because you're trying to prove. It's like a vicious circle thing that's happening. So I'm wary of that. I'm also wary of that being cited as very spiritual, and it kind of bleeding into disposable culture, with regards to treating people as disposable, and a kind of like a spiritual bypassing thing that happens. There is a balance to be had between our personal boundaries, having discussions and like grown-ups, and knowing when our boundaries have been pushed too far, knowing when it's gone too far, and when something needs to be removed, when that situation is at an end, at an impasse, time to close the gate on that particular situation, when enough is enough. These are all lessons of big goddess energy. And one of the cards that came up on Patreon was Rhiannon, and that energy talks about the necessity of life, death, and rebirth, and there is no death without regeneration in her realm. And that's really interesting because you think about the regeneration being afterwards, but actually the regeneration can come through the death process, that we are regenerating at the same time as something is dying off, because as something sheds off us, it allows the space to grow. So that's been a really interesting part of the big goddess process for me. And inviting goddess energy in, and what people think that means, and like what people portray that means, and what that has meant to me, I think has been very different. There is a very widespread image or culture around goddess energy, which is very love-centered, which I have nothing against, but I'm a person of balance, and I believe in all of the emotions, as we talked about in the video about labeling witches as black and white witches. And I feel that every emotion serves a purpose. So a lot of the goddess imagery and people who worship, it's very centered. It's almost like very Woodstock, very 1960s, very like peace on earth, loving everybody vibe to it. And it gets out of balance, I think, when that is what you are immediately immersed in when you start looking for a lot of goddess-centric stuff. And you might have to shuffle through until you find a tribe which fits much better with you, or then there might be a creating of it. A little of that energy can go a long way for me. I don't mind some of it. I don't need it. It feels like a sugar diet for long term, and I don't feel that it equally represents all elements of goddess either. And that's just how I personally feel about it. For me, like, big goddess energy has definitely been balance. It has been accountability. It has been looking at empowerment. It's looking at what we shed and lift and grow. And going forward, I feel like the big goddess energy for me is going to be about what allows me to create, which again we talked about in the podcast in more depth. But I feel like creativity and the power to create something is definitely big goddess energy, because goddess energy always gives birth, but that doesn't have to be literal. If it is, and you're celebrating being a mother in that way, congratulations. But if you're not, or you can't, or that's not a part of you, it doesn't mean that you're not connected to that element of big goddess energy, because you birth things into being all the time. Your words, your ideas, your creations, your creativity. And there really is an energy around this big goddess vibe for me, which came through with both these goddesses from the oracle reading, but in general too, which is we are what we create, what we birth out from ourselves into the world and hand over. And that can be anything: a conversation, a creation, a physical thing, art. It can be somewhere between, like a song, because that's not technically a physical thing, but you can still hold it in your ears and in your mind and in your memory and in your heart, but it's not technically a physical thing. So all of these things to me sort of epitomize big goddess energy and what that means to me. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Many blessings, everybody. I'll catch you next week, patrons. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, you're welcome. You're welcome. If you haven't watched, well, one of you better. This big goddess energy on all fronts. Anyway, that's the weirdo ending for this video. You're welcome. As I said, many blessings, guys, and I will catch you on the next one. Stay flexy, everybody. Many blessings.